Welcome everybody to our live event of Meet the Writers of The Claw, a brand new 45-minute musical that we recently published from Beat by Beat Press. I'm thrilled to introduce you to this incredible team of writers that we have currently with screens off right now. And we're going to chat with you about how we created this show. You're going to learn about these writers, and we're going to answer any questions you have about the show. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to book writer Jessica Penzias.
Hi, everyone.
I would like to introduce you to co-book writer, Carrie Kaz-Mirowitstrom.
Hello.
I would like to introduce you to a lyricist, Kristen Badzina.
Hi, everybody.
And composer-lyricist, Jack Mitchell.
Hello.
And our apprentice, Eli Cohen. So this is the team that created The Claw. We did something different with this show, which is different for us. Typically, it's 1 to 2 to possibly 3 max writers that create a beat by beat show. But for this, we thought it'd be fun to create a writer's room similar to how TV shows are created and expand the creative team and to see how that would help us create a show even better. And so it's been a really fun process, a very unique process. We started on June 1st and we wrote this show in about 2 months. And then post-production was a couple months. And so I'm really excited to share the process with you. It's incredible because this team that you see here is a powerhouse of children's musical theater writers. Like they all have incredible experience writing shows for young people. Every member has been through either the BMI musical theater workshop or the NYU musical theater graduate writing workshop, which are pretty much the premier workshops for training people to write musical theater shows. So it was really cool to connect with these incredible writers on this project because we spoke a very similar lingo, and it was really, really fun. So I'd first like to introduce you to Jess. You guys know Jess from previous Beat by Beat shows. She's been such an important, valuable part of the Beat by Beat team over the past few years. Particularly over the past year, she helped us develop Could You Hug a Cactus, Super Happy Awesome News, The Show Must Go Online, and before that, Bots. And she really is the motor that keeps these projects running. She's an incredible person to work with. And Jess, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how this writer's room got started and why, what excited you about creating this writer's room?
Yeah, absolutely. I really got into musical theater writing because I love collaboration. I started out as a playwright, and over time I realized that I found the creative process so much more fulfilling when I was working with other artists from the start. And while I love writing musicals with one composer lyricist or with a composer and a lyricist, a team of 3, I always did find myself kind of envious of those TV writers' rooms where you're working with a bigger team to break story and write scripts. And so when we were kind of mulling over this idea, I got really excited about the idea of assembling a sort of Avengers style team where we each had very different but complementary strengths, and where together we could create something that none of us could create individually. And this was an incredibly experimental concept. This is not something that's widely done in musical theater. We had no idea how it would turn out. And I have to say, I was completely blown away by this team. Everyone here really does have very different but complementary skill sets. And I was just in awe of the talent and teamwork that everyone exhibited. So it was so much fun.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a very, very awesome and satisfying process. And just like with any project, in the beginning, it's a little bit different. You're kind of meeting everybody for the first time, seeing how people work together. But I remember around week 3 or 4, we were just like in the groove, everybody working on their individual things. We were all collaborating over Slack. And it was just this incredible energy and power of everybody speaking the same language to create the best musical possible. It was awesome. So Carrie, you guys know Carrie from other Beat by Beat projects, including Sally Sells Seashells, Giants in the Sky, and Before the Bell. He's an incredible playwright, an incredible book writer. I was first introduced to Carrie when he had submitted one of the plays that he wrote to us called Little Reds, which is very much not a children's show, but was just like an incredible piece of work. And I was like, I got to chat with this guy, and I'm really happy I did. And so we've created some incredible stuff together. It was awesome having him be part of the team. And Carrie is a recent graduate of the NYU Graduate Musical Theater Writing Program. Carrie, you came up with this initial idea. You pitched to us this idea of a show that takes place inside of a claw game. I didn't do a good job introducing it. Can you give people who don't know the story, like a brief overview of the story, and how did you come up with this idea in the first place?
Sure. Yeah, I would say one of the really fun things in the writer's room was seeing how the initial idea became what we finally ended up with, because the initial pitch was much more of like a chorus line, but in a claw machine, which was sort of this idea of, like you have these different toys that all want to be the one chosen. So you have a God, I hope I get it sort of quality to it, that sort of thing. But then as we were talking about it, I remember one of our early conversations, just as we were getting to know each other, we were talking a lot about what it felt like to go from elementary school to middle school, and just that fear of not knowing what was going to happen next, that sort of thing. And that became a very important core theme to the piece. And once we had that, the show shifted to more being about this claw machine in a bowling alley that had been just hadn't been working for a long time. And finally, the claw machine is fixed and it starts working again. And there's this one toy in particular, Dot, who's felt really comfortable with everything being the same, knowing exactly what the routine is going to be. And all of a sudden, like, she has no idea what's going to happen next. She's going to have to go out into the unknown and just has no idea what she might face. And that became a huge core part of what we were excited to explore with the show.
Yeah, absolutely. It's projects always morph from what the initial idea is to what they turn out to be. It's very interesting to track that process. This one certainly did. And there's times where you kind of like go the wrong direction, but then you kind of veer back. Other times that wrong direction actually is a better direction, and you keep going that direction. And I keep noticing this dinosaur tattoo from a birthday party that yesterday. So just ignore that. Yeah, I mean, it's really awesome to find that journey, and the initial pitch was very different than how the show turned out. And we'll talk more about that as we talk about the process. Kristen, you have worked with Beat by Beat before. Kristen, you know Kristen from the lyricist of Bots. Kristen's an incredible lyricist who seems to hone in on when songs are really needed and like those perfect moments. And she reminded us at a certain point in the process, Dot didn't have an I Want song, and you were very strong advocate of making sure that she had something to sing in the beginning, so that we really identified with her character, and it turned out to be really important and really right. And you are also a part of the BMI Musical Theater Workshop as a lyricist. What was this experience like for you, Kristen, be part of a creative team of this many writers?
Yeah, so this is my first time being part of such a large writing team, and it's been extremely fun. And it was kind of a unique situation because I've worked with Jessica and Denver before, but I hadn't worked with Jack or Carrie. And I feel like sort of the lyricist is kind of the glue between the music and the book. So I really got to like work very closely with everybody, which was awesome. Jack and I were actually in the same class at BMI together, but we never got paired up to write a song together. So I've just been sort of admiring his music from afar. So it was great to finally get to, work with him and write a song with him. And, it's great to have, I like to say as a lyricist, when you're looking for song moments, you're often stealing from ideas from the librettist. So it was awesome to have both Carrie and Jessica's ideas to steal from. The song that we're talking about, the Who Knows What, was from a monologue that Jessica had written for Dot. And, we saw that hook idea, the who knows what and the who knows where, and pulled it out and said, oh, that's a great idea. That would make a great song, and really expanded on it from there. So yeah, this was really just a joy for me to be able to work with so many different minds, musically and book-wise.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work, obviously, to create this show, but it was a little bit less work than a traditional musical is, because there are so many other people that are like providing content for you to sort of, like you said, steal from or adapt or whatever. And everyone's kind of doing their own work independently that they're sharing. And you, instead of just having to constantly create stuff on a blank page, you're able to sort of like be inspired by all the different pieces that people are contributing, which I think was a really awesome part of the process for sure. I also like to introduce you to Jack. Jack, I was introduced to through Jess, and Jack is a composer-songwriter who has this incredible ability to write for young audiences and young people. He's written and currently writes incredible material for the award-winning Story Pirates podcast. You can find anywhere. These songs are incredible, and they when I listen to Jack's music, I just feel so joyful, and they feel like beat by beat songs to me. He just really understands that way to not write down to kids, but create these incredible contemporary melodies that are just really, really fun to listen to. So Jack, working with this team, how was it different than working on, let's say, like the Story Pirates podcast? Like, what was the experience like for you?
I think there were some similarities in that, when I'm working with a team, like for the Story Pirates podcast, we have script writers that write the scripts, and we have songwriters, composers that write the songs. And so there is a lot of back and forth in that capacity. So I could, take some of the skills that I've learned over the years working on the Story Pirates podcast, but I honestly felt like there were probably even more similarities to the writers' rooms that I worked in, and also Eli worked in when we were undergrads at Northwestern University, and we were part of a program called the WAMU Show, which is the largest student-written musical in the country, which is a musical that's written every year in 9 months by like 35 to 40 people, depending on the year. So there's always people running around working on different things. And so I think, yes, there were some similarities in working in the Story Pirates writers room, in that like we storyboard the whole season, and we, come up with different, who's going to take what capacity. But as far as musical writing goes, like there were a lot of similarities into writers' rooms that I had worked in college, which is very kind of unique to work in a musical form like this. And so like having had that experience was an amazing baseline into sort of how we divide up beats of the show, beats by beats, and also song responsibilities and collaborations, and it was really exciting to be able to work with every person on the team on different songs or different parts of the show, and have little breakout sessions with almost everybody where we could, Denver, you and I could geek out about music for a while, and then Kristen and I could meet and work through a lyric and a song that we work on together, and then work on how that affects the libretto. So it was a really amazing and fun process.
It was this was the first time that I've ever worked with another composer on a project, and so that was a really cool, fun process, because I would play a draft of a song in one of these meetings, and Jack would be like, "Are you sure you want to go with that D flat there? I mean, I'm thinking like maybe the melody should be," because he also has perfect pitch, and so he would be able to call out these things, and to be able to talk in music language with somebody else was really awesome.
3,000 miles away.
Yeah. And then finally, Eli. So Eli is a recent graduate of Northwestern, and he submitted some of his works to us, and we were just blown away by the quality of his songwriting. For being like so young in his career, these songs I wanted to listen to over and over again. They were so great. He wrote for, like Jack mentioned, the WAMU Show, which is a huge student collaborative process of creating a musical. And so we wanted to find a place for Eli, and so we created a position of a writer's apprentice. So he essentially shadowed all the meetings, helped us keep notes, helped us keep track of everything, but also would, occasionally chime in with some of these brilliant, these brilliant philosophical ways that grounded us when we got too distracted. And so it was Eli's idea, who kind of gave us the metaphor of this being sort of from elementary school to middle school transition. And it was really awesome having Eli be part of the team and helping us all along the way. Eli, what surprised you about this process? Like, what did you think you were getting into, and then what did it turn into? And what was your experience like?
I think what surprised me is just how wonderful everyone is. It was just truly every single person that I got to work with in this process was so giving and so kind, and worked so hard and cared so much, that it was such a wonderful space to be in. And that was something that was really nice after, the craziness of the past year and graduating college and being at home, just to have sort of my reintroduction to being on this creative side of theater, being in such a positive and kind and giving room where everyone cared so much about making the absolute best show that they could. And it really shows in what we were able to create. And I always felt like I was wanted in the room. I always felt like I was welcome. I remember I had the really amazing side project that I did one meeting of getting to come up with all the bear pun names. And that was a really great moment for me, as well as our back and forth at one meeting on the bing, bang, ba-da-da-da, specifically the second line of that, how we wanted to use those syllables to make it easier to say. I'm just feeling like, I'm just always feeling like my voice had a place, and that it was really wonderful. And I think that I didn't know what I was getting into. And I think, like Jack said, I had the impression of it would probably be, like WAMU was when I was in college, but getting to come to this in a professional side and really seeing what it's like to work with people who have done this so many times and being able to learn so much from people was a wonderful experience.
Awesome. It was awesome having you be a part of it for sure. Like it made it a lot more enjoyable for sure. So let's talk a little bit about the specific process that we took to get from Carrie's pitch, which was Inside a Claw Machine, to what we ended up with. So for those of you that might be interested in writing shows, writing musicals, like we're going to walk you through a little bit like what we did and what typically are the steps that are taken to get a show from idea to full final version. So typically book comes first, but so we started with an idea, an outline. Jess, what happened from there? Like after we had this sort of like this one paragraph pitch, what was the next step?
Yeah, so BMI really trained me to put outline first. I obsessively outline before I dive into a project, and I obsessively kind of hone in on what the theme of the piece is, because when you write a musical, there's so many moving parts, and if you don't kind of have a roadmap, at least in my philosophy, you can get lost. And if you write the wrong song, it's way worse than just writing the wrong scene, because you spent so much time going from script to lyric to music back to script, only to figure out that like this is not the theme we're even going for, and this is not the direction we're going. It's really can be a disaster. And with this project, we were setting out to write a musical in like 2 to 3 months. We really have to know where we're going. And there's a big group of people. So we all have to kind of have a roadmap of what happens next. So Carrie and I worked very closely together to map out the show and get it down on paper so everyone could kind of follow along. What was so fun about this process was that it really was a group effort. Like it's everything I kind of hoped for when we were initially discussing the concept of a writer's room. We were brainstorming together, like who are the toys in this claw game? What kind of toys would they be based off of? We had, a Slack channel going where we're tossing in ideas about Beanie Babies and stuffed animals and Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles, and what would these toys even be? And then of course, when you're mapping something out, you're thinking about the arc of the storytelling. So what is the setup? What is the conflict? And what is the resolution? And for us, we honed in on this character of Dot, a stuffed cow who's terrified of the unknown. And that became our theme, fear of the unknown. And she is determined to hold on to her best friend, Aiden, at all costs. She really isn't ready to leave this game and leave her best friend. And then we had to figure out, the middle chunk, which is the conflict, and what does she do in order to achieve that goal? What characters does she meet along the way? How does she succeed and how does she fail along that journey? And then ultimately, we led her to her resolution, which was that she has the strength and the independence and the confidence to face the unknown and go out into the next chapter of her life. So that all came from, Carrie's little nugget of a chorus line set inside a claw game. We all jumped on that idea and built it out together and got it down on paper, which was so much fun.
It's really interesting how you talk about how the seed and the sort of theme comes first, and then the characters we kind of chose the characters based on how we could best serve that theme so much, but they almost came last, right? The actual specific types of characters and even who Dot and Aiden were was like one of the last things we kind of decided before we started writing. Like we knew what the characters needed, their obstacles, but in terms of like, their specific names, like that wasn't like the story came first, that whatever served our theme kind of came first as well.
Yeah, I think it's different with different projects, but definitely in this world that Carrie had pitched, where all these toys are about to leave into something they've never encountered before, we really started with theme.
And usually in our top of our Google Doc, we keep that theme like in a bold sentence, like at the very top of every doc of every version. So like we don't lose faith that like BMI, they would teach you this too, that seed, that thing that like initially made you want to write this show, because it's very easy to veer off the path as you get writing. But it's always like in bold at the top of our docs so that like we can always reference it. And then the outline is always there for us in case we always get sidetracked. We can go back to the outline and be like, oh, that didn't achieve what we needed to achieve. So Carrie, we have an outline. How did you guys decide what scenes to write first? How did you decide what scene you would write versus Jess? How did you keep a consistent voice? That's a lot of questions, but
one of the great things about this process, about working with Jess, is very early on, I think we could both feel that there really wasn't like ego. So we both knew whatever scene we started with, we would both have our hands on it eventually. So there wasn't like, oh, I need to take this, or oh, I need to take this, because we knew we would each ultimately, you know, take a pass, multiple passes on everything. And so we knew one of the most important things was going to be figuring out the voice of Dot initially. And so, but the nice thing is that Dot's in every single scene. So what ended up happening is I took the first scene, Jess took the scene where she also tackled the flare bearers. That was the first one you did? Yeah. And the nice thing about that is that means that we already had 2 passes, 2 takes on Dot. And what we essentially found, my takeaway from it is, you know, Dot is in one place at the top of the show, and then she has a very definite shift in, you know, her comfort level after the game turns back on. And so I had written Dot one way. Jess's version of Dot was a little bit different, but we essentially found that thread where, you know, based off of these new circumstances, it made sense that emotionally she would shift in this direction. So I think just what we naturally started with showed a clear arc in her journey. And, you know, then we just polished along the way, but it gave us 2 strong points of her emotional life to begin with, which was great. Yeah.
So we've got some scenes now, and then Kristen and Jack, it's now our turn to basically turn some of these scenes and to start finally get to a point of being able to write some songs, which usually comes a little bit later. A lot of book work, a lot of outline work comes first, and then like when you feel like you're in a comfortable place, like, all right, we could probably risk writing some songs right now, even if they end up changing. Like we could probably dive in. So what was like, Kristen, what was your strategy or process of finding moments to turn into songs, and what were some of the first moments that I guess attracted you to turn into song moments?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of that also happens in the book writing. Like you can kind of tell when book writers think that something should be a song because they like write a lot and you're like, oh, okay, they want this to be a song. But you know, you can always, there's something that's kind of intuitive about it too, just like finding something that's like really heightened or a really emotional moment, or in the case of Beat by Beat shows, really fun. Like what would be a super fun moment to turn into a song? And then really dive into that scene and find the hook, which is kind of the main idea of the song that you're going to write. So it's either, you know, brainstorming the scene and coming up with a phrase on your own that is a hook, or potentially you can pick that out of the book and say, I think the best day since yesterday was also, it was dialogue before it was a hook, and saying, oh, that would be a fantastic hook. And then I like to go to the composer and say, hey, what do you think about this for a hook? And start thinking about that. And then what I like to do is sort of write a first draft of lyrics before handing it over to a composer. So it's sort of a really rough, you know, this section is going to be about this section is going to be about this. Maybe it rhymes, maybe it doesn't, but it's sort of a rough pass before handing it off to a composer to write music. I guess I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really helpful. And that's definitely been the way that I think a lot of us are used to writing songs, that similar process. Start with a hook, chat about it, write some music, and then fill out the rest of the lyrics once you have some music to sort of lay the lyrics onto. Like, Jack, what was one of the first song moments that you tackled, and what drew you to that moment?
I think if my memory serves, the first little nugget that I did was one of the Goodbyes songs for Veronica, who's one of our bears. So in the show, whenever some toy gets taken by the claw, the rest of the toys sing a goodbye refrain, wishing them well in the great unknown. And that I think it was sort of the simplicity of the moment that drew me into it, as it's like sort of, where do you start, right? When you're starting writing music. And I thought, okay, well, if I can sort of get a hook together, and it's going to be a short vignette that we can repeat in maybe some different styles, that sort of could be a good place to just start and sort of try to find the sound of the show, try to find how is it saying, what is the style. And so that's where I started. And I felt like a manageable piece to bite off, if you will, without having to tackle like, you know, a 3-minute, 4-minute song. Let's just try to find that goodbye refrain, and then things can sort of snowball from there.
And one of your magnus opuses of this show was Double Trouble, of course. One of the hit songs of the show, which is a moment when the Beanie Elders are describing to our main characters what is this thing called the Double Trouble. And it's a very stylized song. How did you write that? What was your first? Did that come quickly? Like, oh, I know what this is going to be, and like you started playing it, or was it like a slog?
That one actually came pretty quickly. I just tried to find the groove of it, and I knew I wanted to sort of be like an old sort of musical theater style song and dance for these wise beanie elders. And so honestly, that they sort of say like deadlines beget work, and I knew I had to turn in a draft of that song. So I was like, you know what? It's going to happen. And luckily, actually, the tune came to me pretty quickly. I went first to they did the Double Trouble, try to find sort of the rhythm of how that would sing, because we knew it was going to be Double Trouble. And that sort of got me going. And then I had a lot of fun. And I think, I had a lot of fun with sort of figuring out, what we want horns on this. Do we want sort of like xylophone? And then we collaborated with our orchestrator, Andrew Fox, who's an amazing orchestrator. And he did some incredible horn lines and amazing stuff with the different instruments that he used. And it really brought the song to another level.
And that kind of brings us to this idea of collaboration and this idea of the deadlines, which I think is important. Definitely for me. We've all talked about this in our process, but I think for any creative and any writer, having these deadlines is important. And I think the structure of the writer's room was beneficial for all of us. So the way it worked was we met twice a week, Mondays and Wednesdays, I think, for 2 hours, and we would meet just like this. And then in between, we used several different tools for sort of offline collaboration or collaboration that wasn't in real time. We used Slack, which was our main tool for communication, in which we had different threads for everything from what should the character of Dot be to what do claw games look like on the inside. And we used Dropbox to, of course, share MP3s and files back and forth. We used Google Docs to basically have a collaborative doc that we could go in and out of and leave comments on. And of course, we used Zoom like this. And so it's pretty incredible. We've all gotten used to this, I guess, by now, but like these tools that are available to us to be able to sort of collaborate. But what do you think? I'm going to give this question to Eli first. Part of that process, when you're working with a group of people, there are certain elements that make collaboration in a group successful. You probably have experienced this with the WAMU show, Eli, but you also witness a lot of how we work together, maybe in a different way than we witnessed it because we were a little bit more in it. If there are other people out there working in a team of people, what do you feel are qualities that make a group collaboration like this successful? Or what did you observe?
I think something that really always stuck out to me is like knowing when to pick your battles, of knowing that like this is something that I don't need to be precious about. This is not a life or death situation. This is something where, I can go and try and write a different version of this verse. And if it's not better, it's not better. And then I'll come back with a different version of it and be like, oh no, the other version was better. But also knowing when like people want to advocate for things they really believe in about the show and seeing people's passion and love come through. And also their willingness to just listen to the people around them is so important for an effective collaboration, was so clear throughout this process. And that was really, really wonderful.
Awesome. Does anybody want to add to that? Anything that you felt and experienced when sort of like, Jess?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of yes-anding going on, which is, a key rule of improv is to accept what someone's giving you and build off of it. So we weren't really shutting down each other's ideas. We were always kind of building on them and riffing off of each other, which is exactly why we created this room in the first place.
Absolutely, because it's and we talked about this before. It's scary to sometimes share your stuff in front of other people, even if they are people you've worked with before. But like if there's colleagues you respect, and like you write a draft of something and you're not sure if it's good or not, but like you kind of just have to be brave, and the team around you has to be supported enough to be able to do it, and like people like. Yeah, not precious enough and faithful enough that you're all after the same goal, which is to write the best show possible. And it's not always easy, but I think that is an important part of it. Carrie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, and I would say, this maybe seems obvious, but like I think it's important to work with collaborators whose work you're genuinely excited by, because then, when they do have an idea, when they create something that's amazing and it's maybe not the idea you had, you never feel like, oh, it's, them being chosen over me. It's just like, no, this idea is great, and I'm excited to, keep pursuing and polishing this idea. Just the, sort of, it's the same thing that's mentioned in books like the Hamilton annotated notes and all of that sort of thing is best idea wins. And so you need to not, no one's going to have a great ideas all the time, but being around people whose work genuinely excites you makes that process of discovering the best ideas just so much easier.
Awesome. I'm going to ask everyone a few more questions, but I just want to say to anybody watching right now, if you have questions about the CLAW, about the process, about how anything was written, or just about writing musicals in general, feel free to put them into the comments right now. And then we'll address some of them in like 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes or so. We're going to go on for another 10, 15 minutes or so. So feel free to, if you have questions, drop them in, and then we'll review and pick some and answer them the best that we can. Carrie, you brought some stuffed animals into the meetings pretty often times.
I did. I specifically brought in stuffed animals that, I mean, if we want, I can go grab them, but they're ones where you can reverse them based on your mood. They have like frowny faces or happy faces, depending on your mood. And I mean, I never actually used it on the call. Like I never like snuck it onto the screen with like the angry plushie there for people to know I was in a bad mood. But it felt like it was just a nice reminder of like, hey, we are creating stuff with these adorable, lovely characters, and we're doing it because we either used to or still love these sorts of toys, and there's like a real joy and celebration to that. So I always thought that added to the room nicely, but I think Kristen has a much more extensive plushie collection than I do.
Well, I have a 1-year-old, so that's why I have an extensive plushie collection. But yeah, I kind of I borrowed his toys to bring to our celebration party meeting.
So one of the fun parts of this process too, of having such a big group, was that we were able to do these really fun read-throughs at the end. As we started like getting a full drafts of scenes and songs, we were able to, divvy out parts and allow and do and kind of read through the scripts. Kristen, can you tell us a little bit about like what that was like and how that benefited the process?
Totally. It was fun to do read-throughs with this group because there was enough people that we could swap roles. So I feel like for a while we were all kind of sticking to the same role. Like Carrie was always Shakespeare and Jack was always Aiden. And but then, for the last read-through or the last couple of read-throughs, we would switch it up, and it was really nice because we could all hear the script on different voices and hear different readings of different lines. And I think that really illuminates, what needs to change, what's really, really working. So that was kind of a cool experience that I haven't experienced before in terms of read-throughs.
Definitely. Yeah, it was really fun and really helpful to be able to hear what was working and wasn't working. I mean, it's not ideal over Zoom, but you can kind of get a pretty good sense. We would see like the pacing of the scene is a little bit off. Like we kind of need to adjust this a little bit. Jack, go ahead, Carrie.
Oh yeah, and I was going to say just with that, like personally, I come from an acting background originally. So when I'm writing, I'm going like, oh, I can see how this line is justified if you perform it like that. But it's really helpful to have other people do it because you can see like what is actually clear on the page. Like, okay, I know that it can be said this way, but will that be clear to anyone else? And so it's just a really useful barometer for what's actually translating.
Totally.
Yeah.
So after we basically wrote a full draft of the show, as Jack mentioned, we then worked with a orchestrator who helped us realize these sort of piano, vocal, rough demos that Jack and I had made into full orchestrated tracks. And then we were able to work with incredible young talent to basically provide the vocal recordings all remotely now, which is amazing, to the tracks. And then we mixed it all together. And the incredible vocals with the orchestrations and put the final materials. And that's kind of how we end up with the final product. But it's Andrew Fox, who is an incredible orchestrator based in New York City. It's a very valuable process. Part of this process and has been part of like many BYB shows. And he sort of elevates the music to a whole other level. If anybody has any questions, feel free to leave them into the comments. Jack, what was the most challenging part of this process?
a good question. 'Cause I really felt like it was such a joy really throughout. I think the speed of it was a challenge, but because we're so used to musicals taking years and years and years to get completed and performed, and so it was exciting to have this more compressed timeline. But that's of course also a challenge because you got to pump out songs, we got to pump out scenes, we got to pump out lyrics. I mean, we have to do it, and we have to do it fast. And in some ways, I think that's sort of my favorite way to work, because like that stuff gets done that way. I mean, it has to get done, it gets done, but it's also a challenge because you have to be on your game, you have to be very on top of your deadline, your own personal deadlines, which then affect the group's deadlines. But I felt like everybody was really in tune. We were all, I think, very much like on the same page as far as like what we thought was reasonable for our process timeline, and man, we got a show.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you to my colleagues and writers. It's been an incredible joy to create this show for you that will now live forever in this sort of like catalog of musicals that kids will be doing all over. It really means the world when people care so much about what they're writing, even if it is for kids. And that showed through over and over and over again, the amount of work and dedication and late nights and rewrites and drafts. It's just, I'm so thrilled with how the project turned out. So for those of you watching, if you're able to download the Perusal and license the show, now if you go to the Beat by Beat website, you can listen to the whole recordings, you can download a Perusal for free. The show is 45 minutes long. It's written with kids 7 to 12 years old in mind. And we're just really excited to see what you do with the show. And we hope that you got a little bit out of meeting the team behind it and how we created it. So thank you guys for being a part of this. And we'll see you next time. Bye.